Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen. I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I'm doing a video about what kind of a book you should write. Part of this I touched on in a previous video, which I'm going to go over again because I think it's important. I said one of the mistakes that people make when they submit to a literary agent is in their query letter or cover letter they say things like, I'm going to be the next, and then they name a big author. And that isn't what the agent is looking for, and that isn't what the publisher is looking for. In terms of sales, yes, absolutely, they want you to be a big seller and do really, really well. But what they actually want is you to be the first you. They want a unique person with a unique voice, unique stories that's slightly different that they haven't seen before. Because if you think about some of the really big authors, a lot of them, are getting up in age, and some of them just stop writing. Some of them pass the book to someone else if it's a franchise that can keep going, and they want to see more of them. An example would be Lee Childs. He co-wrote last few kind of Jack Reacher books with his brother, and then he's stopped writing them, and now his brother is continuing because there are more stories to be told. The fan base is still there. It's very, very big. It's been going for something like 25 years or something now, but there are new people coming on all the time, and they want more Reacher stories. Stephen King is now in his 70s, and it's not that they want someone to take over the mantle of Stephen King. They want another horror writer who's a little bit different to come in and do something like that. So when I say they want the first you, they want someone to come in who's fits comfortably next to someone else, or is something so unique they can kind of tread their own path but have really big sales, and that's what they want. But related to that is, well, what kind of a book should you write? Who should you try and please when you're working on this book? P.L. Stewart and Taylor recently, on their page chewing, I'll put a link down below, spoke to literary agent John Jarrold. Now, he's been in the business a long time. He was previously a publisher. He published and managed 3 science fiction and fantasy imprints in the UK, in London, including Orbit. Then he stepped away from that, and then since about 2004, I think it is, he's been a literary agent, and he's got a list of clients as long as my leg, from some very big names that you know. And in this live stream, which is obviously like an hour long or something they did, and people sending questions, one of the first things he said, and I've heard him say it before, he gets a lot of submissions every year. On an average, he takes on 1 to 2 clients. And the other thing is, he'd learnt from his director when he was working at the publisher, is when they're buying books as the publisher, if they have any doubts whatsoever about a book, they say no. And it's the same thing with him as a literary agent, because he needs to be so invested in a book. He needs to absolutely love a book for whatever reason. Every agent has personal tastes. I've talked about this before. Agent A could say, yeah, it's not for me, and they put it away and say, no, thank you. And Agent B absolutely loves it and takes it on, and it goes to be a bestseller. It's not that Agent A was wrong. It's that they couldn't get behind it. It wasn't their thing. They weren't the champion for it. And if everyone's got particular tastes, you have to kind of roll with that. It's difficult to accept, but that's kind of part of the business. So John was saying that if he takes on a book and he absolutely loves it, and he can then champion that book and take it to the publisher and talk to them about it, and he knows the business, all this kind of thing. But equally, you're not writing to try and find a particular agent that your book will sit within. Like, you could look at manuscript wish lists, and if you find one that matches, great. Let's say you've written a horror comedy about vampires, like a What We Do in the Shadows type document thing as a book. And, you've been sending out to agents and you haven't found anything. And then you see one agent that says on the manuscript wish list, oh, I'd really like that. Perfect, you send it to them, that kind of a thing. But you didn't write it specifically for them. You didn't know at the time, because it'll take you, so many months to write a book, so many years to write a book. And if you're constantly chasing a trend, which you should never do, it should pass. So, who do you write the book for? The simple and the really complicated answer is you write the book for you. The audience is you. I'll explain why, but look at it this way. My first trilogy, The Age of Darkness, Battle Mage, Blood Mage and Chaos Mage, if you haven't, go and check them out, please. They're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones, whatever else, you'll find them online. I wrote that as a non-standard trilogy, in a way. I knew that some people wouldn't like it and other people would get behind it. In terms of any series, this is just standard. You get a lot of sales on the first book, and then the sales will tail off. Now, everyone will take a chance on a first book in a series, And if some like it, obviously they'll then go buy the second and then buy the third. Equally, if they love the first, some people will get the second one and go, oh yeah, it was okay, not too sure, and then they'll tail off and they won't get the third. But some will. This is just how it always works. So your sales on your first book will always be very, very high. What I wanted to do, therefore, with my first trilogy, with that kind of in the back of my mind, was pour a lot of big ideas into this first book and make it really big and really bombastic and really different. And lots of fantastic elements that I'd seen lacking in the fantasy that I was reading. I wasn't finding certain things, and I thought I would love to see a book with these elements front and centre rather than kind of snuck in through the back door. You get 200 pages in and it feels like a historical drama, historical fiction, and then suddenly there's a dragon and you're like, oh, okay, so it is fantasy. I was seeing a lot of that and I thought, no, I want really front and centre, bright, non-human races and overt magic with mages and all this kind of stuff. So straight away, page one, you know what you're getting. On the second book, I then did a slightly different subgenre within fantasy, and even though the stories continue, some of the main characters move into the background, and some of the other characters who are brand new move into the foreground, and then a slightly different subgenre in fantasy again for the third book. So 3 stories, all connected, they overlap, they have threads that tie all the way through, but it wasn't your standard trilogy of, part 1, part 2, part 3, which happens with a lot of series. And predictably, what do you think the result was? Some people loved it. Some readers thought they read the first book and, it starts with a really big war. You can't really go any bigger than that. So having a smaller story, a quieter story, a more nuanced, character-driven story focused on a city, some people actually loved that, and then the third one is different again. Some people hated it. They came in with their own expectations. They wanted a big story that grew and grew and grew, and that was, essentially cut into 3 parts, or it builds over these 3 parts and makes something that's one massive story. I hadn't done that, and some readers didn't like that. The second trilogy, set within the same world, 10 years after the third book, book 4 essentially. This time, this second trilogy, Mage Born, Mage Fall, Mage Bane, was one large story. There are definitive beginning, middles and ends, sort of not exactly a cliffhanger, but there's an ending at the end of that first book, and the same with the second, and then the third one ties everything all together from that trilogy, but also the previous trilogy. And of course, what happened? Some people didn't like it because they said, oh, well, it's all just one big story and it feels like you just cut it into 3 and nothing really happens in this book, which is ridiculous because of course it does. But equally I was tying up things from the previous trilogy because I didn't know if I'd ever go back to this world. And it just proved what I already knew. You can't please everybody all of the time. Trying to write a book in a particular format, never mind a story, never mind the characters, never mind including certain things, you just can't please everyone all the time, so you shouldn't try. Which goes back to the thing of the person you should be writing the book for is you. Just as your agent needs to be a champion for your book, you need to be able to comfortably sit with your book and talk about it potentially for many, many years. You'll have many interviews and, press releases and blogs and YouTube videos and whatever it might be to build up to the release of that first book. And then thereafter, if the book is popular or it's one of these things that, your debut, people will always want to talk about it. And you need to be able to have confidence in your book. Now, it might be that in years to come, you look back on that first book and think, it's a bit rough, and if I was writing it these days, I would change this and change that, and tweak it, all the rest of it. But it was the best at what I can do at that time in that stage of my career, my writing career, and, stage of my life. But equally, if you've just written it just because you think, oh, that's quite popular, that might work, I'll have a go at that, and you're not really behind it, you don't really believe in it, you don't really love the book that you've written and want to go out and share it with people, then I don't think it's going to be a good move. I don't think it's a wise thing to do. It could be that you've read a book and you think, I'd like to write something similar to that, but I want my own ideas and own themes, and it'd sit comfortably next to it on the shelf. And when you submit your book in a query letter, they always want comparison titles, or comp titles as they say. And if you're able to point comfortably to a couple of things and say my book is a bit like this and a bit like that, that's great. It helps them with marketing, helps them with selling the book. It's not a crime to do that. You should be able to talk about your book in relation to other things. Equally, as I said, some people write things that are so unique and so different, that it's harder to kind of quantify, but you could point to other media, perhaps like a TV show or a film or a comic or an anime or whatever it might be, or a game even, then that's fine. If your book kind of is slightly apart, that can be a strength too, because it's unique, because there isn't anything particularly like it. I recently went to my first convention in Chicago, Capricorn 43, and one of the panels I was on was about what would you like to see more of in fantasy? What is missing from the genre? And that was essentially how I approached when I wrote my first book. What kind of book would I like to see? If I walk into a bookshop and I start browsing the shelves, what am I not finding? And I wrote that particular book. Now, it could be there's a gap in the market, it could be that there's a growing demand for something, and what you're writing falls into that space. There again, that's fine. You are still writing something that you love that is in a particular subgenre. Great. If there's a market for it, when you take it to the agent and they say, yes, this is selling really well, this kind of subgenre is growing, great, we can take it forward, as long as they obviously like the story and the characters and they think it's well written and so on. That's great. But you should still be writing the book for you, not for somebody else. The one thing that's hard to know is, if you're writing a book that sits within a subgenre, is it still popular? Which is why I think it's important to go to events, or if you can't go to them physically, go online, go on Twitter, and find when agents are on panels and talking about a thing and ask them questions. You can't just email agents randomly and say, is this still popular? Should I write a book in this area? I can do that now because I have a literary agent, and I can say to her, I'm thinking of writing a book that fits within this subspace. What's the market like? And she might say, oh, that's growing, that's really developing. Yes, that's fine. Or she might say, no, at the moment, there's so many books coming out. I've got 3 with other clients that are going to editors, and I'm struggling to sell them. You writing a 4th one in that area, I don't think it's a really good idea and an investment of your time. But obviously, if you haven't got a literary agent and you're just starting out, it's harder to do. So if you can find out the information online, that can save you the pain. You could still write that book, you could still self-publish it, it could still find a market, but it's down to the case of, do you have the time, do you have the money, do you have the skills, and you have, to fit it in around everything else in your life to take that book forward to the market as a self-publisher, and it may find an audience. But then again, it may not. So do you want to invest all of your time and all of your money in that? If you can find out this kind of stuff beforehand, then that's great. That was slightly rambly today, so I'll kind of summarise. Write the kind of book that you want, that you're not finding, that you love. Write something that you'll be proud to talk about and champion for potentially years and talk about as your debut. If you can, find out information about the subgenre or the area that you're writing in ahead of time by physically going to conventions. Many of them now have a virtual or remote option, which you can do, buy a ticket for a reduced price and watch panels online and even ask questions online. Alternatively, go onto Twitter. Some agents have manuscript wish lists that will show you what kind of things they're looking for, and there are some things under the hashtag #AskAgent where you can ask an agent a particular time, a particular question, and try and find out, I'm going to write a book that's supernatural, horror, whatever it might be. Is this growing? Is this popular? And so on. There again, if you don't want to do any of that, you could self-publish it and take the gamble and take all of the risk yourself by paying for all of it. Hopefully that was useful. If you like this channel or you want to support it, there's a Patreon link down below with different options to support the growth of this channel, but also there's a private writing forum where other people share their work and give comments and feedback and that kind of thing. That's all I'm going to talk about this week. I'll be back next week with another video.